so much for having me, Anubhuti. It's been a great show so far. I've been watching in bits and pieces, and congratulations for pulling off such a great event. But what's coming up next is slightly different, and it's really special. So let's get to it straight. My next guest needs no special introduction. The modern literary legend, Amish Tripathi. Amish, hi, how are you doing?
I'm well, thank you, and thank you for a very short but very embarrassing introduction. Thank you.
How's it going
in London? Oh well, and we're in lockdown out here, so things are. I'm a diplomat, so I have to be a little careful with my words. But things are very difficult in Europe and the UK. There has been a very, very serious second wave, and winters hit hard. Let's hope the vaccine. But even if the vaccine comes out, it's not going to be widely available for at least a year.
Yeah.
So
another year probably. I mean, this is all great news what we hear from Pfizer, from Moderna, etc. But hey, this is the new world that we live in, right? So let me sort of get your initial thoughts. Today, you're speaking to a whole range of communicators, public relations professionals, marketers. So just let me get your initial thoughts on this, and we'll take it from there.
Okay. So so thanks, Bianca. And essentially, the brief that I was given by Spectra was to speak on the importance of stories when it comes to brands, when it comes to marketing, when it comes to communication. I would suggest that actually we take a step back and realize the importance of stories in the process of life itself. There's a brilliant thinker and author called Muriel Dickinson. I'm paraphrasing her when I say that she said that the universe is actually not made up of atoms. The universe is actually made up of stories. And it's a deeply, deeply insightful point. The lives that we live is essentially the stories that we live. Our perception of ourselves is the stories that we think ring true of ourselves. Our perception of others is the stories that we think through of others. Our perception of our culture is the stories that we collectively believe in. And the greatest thinkers in human history, the greatest communicators in human history, have always been fantastic storytellers. For example, if I have to, if I ask you, and unfortunately, this is an online program, and I'm not standing in front of you physically to see a show of hands. But if I asked you guys who composed the Mahabharata, I'm sure, considering there's an Indian audience, I'm sure I would get the correct answer, or the apparently correct answer, which is Ved Vyas. That, why would I say that it's apparently correct? Because Ved Vyas is actually just a title. It's not a name. Most people don't know that. There is a Ved Vyas in every age. The man who took on the title of Ved Vyas in our age, his actual name was Krishna Dwaipayan. Right? That was his actual name. How did he get the title of Ved Vyas? It's because he compiled the Vedas for our age, the belief, the dharmic belief, which is Hindu, Buddhist, Jain, Sikh religions. The dharmic belief is that through the cycle of time, knowledge is lost, and then when a new age dawns, knowledge is rediscovered and spread once again. And those who do that, because the primary sources of knowledge in the dharmic way are the Vedas. So the first one to compile the Vedas once again for a new age is given the title Ved Vyas. So the Ved Vyas of our age was Krishna Dwaipayan. And like I explained, he got the title Ved Vyas because he compiled the Vedas, the 4 Vedas, and which, as we all know, is the source of knowledge in the Indian way. But we also know that Ved Vyas composed the Mahabharata. And the question arises, why did he compose the Mahabharata? And why is the Mahabharata sometimes called the 5th Veda? There's a very simple reason for it. Legends say that when Ved Vyas compiled the Vedas, he realized that this is very profound knowledge. This is knowledge that is useful for humanity. This is knowledge that ideally everyone should read and everyone should try and understand and learn from and apply in their lives. But he also realized that the Vedas are very difficult to understand. Many read it but actually don't get anything from it because it's hugely complex. You need to train yourself to be able to understand the Vedas and the Upanishads. So the legend goes, Krishna Dwaipaya, Ved Vyas Ji, composed the Mahabharata so that through a really page-turning story, to a rocking story, you can understand the philosophies of the Vedas. Because he realized that the Vedas might be dry and difficult for most people, but the Mahabharata, a rocking story, everyone will like. And while reading that story, without realizing it, you actually can communicate the philosophies of the Vedas. Net, what is the deeper insight? That stories are fantastic carriers for deeper communication, deeper knowledge that we want to communicate. That was the key insight. And the best communicators, the best philosophers have usually been fantastic storytellers. That's how they communicate their philosophies. It's true of those of Valmiki ji who composed the original Ramayana. It's true of our of political leaders through history. Think of political leaders who you follow today. I never comment on politics, so I'm not going to say who my favorite politician is. But think of the political leaders you follow today, and those whose speeches are mesmerizing, those who can hold your attention for an hour and communicate dry stuff, but they do it in such an engaging manner through stories that their message reaches deep into your soul and you support them. And this is true of, I believe, this should be true of brands as well. Now, I am in the UK right now. I am in London, and I have to tell you, watching TV out here is a seriously depressing exercise. Advertisements are terrible. They're like pamphlets and brochures just converted into ads. They are terrible. They cannot hold any attention. And I can understand some client. I mean, I was in the corporate world once upon a time. One of the departments I ran was marketing, and I know how irritating clients can be. I can understand a client saying, "These are my product features. Just communicate." Right? And you think you are communicating it. Actually, all you're doing is speaking it. No one is listening. To make someone listen, you need to communicate a good story. That's what Indian ad agencies, Indian marketing guys get so well. They know how to communicate deeper messages through good stories. Uh, and this, therefore, then is the deepest insight that I have learned on the importance of stories. All of us, all of us who want to influence others, who want to take on leadership roles, who want to communicate, who want to get our points of view across, we have to learn to be good storytellers. Only then will someone be willing to listen. Us speaking with no one else listening is like winking in the dark. It actually serves no purpose. No one really knows that you've done it. You're the only one who knows. For someone to listen, you need to be a good storyteller.
You actually left quite a few thoughts there. One that sticks is that communication and storytelling are so intrinsically connected, right? And how do you hold somebody's attention? How do you communicate your stories? Interestingly, a few years ago, I did a TEDx talk on how can your personal story sort of help build your own brand, your very unique brand. And I want to delve into your brand a little bit later. But first off, tell me this whole thing about storytelling, right? It's not a static skill. Even though people say everyone was born to be able to tell their story, it's not really true. How dynamic our storytelling is I think, directly proportional to our sense of curiosity and our willingness to explore and take risks in this world. So, give me a sense of how your own storytelling has maybe evolved over the years since the time when you first started your book, which was, I guess, about 2 years in the making, and then it came out in 2010. So, I'm assuming it's now a 12-year journey for you. So, how has your own storytelling and your style changed over the years?
No, it was actually my first book, Immortals of Melua, was 5-6 years in the making. Remember, I wrote my first two books along with my job.
Yeah.
So I was writing on weekends and on my commutes, morning and because in Mumbai we have this wonderful concept called a traffic jam, which you guys benefit from in Bangalore as well, from what I've been told.
Yes.
So I used to write on the backseat of my car. That's when I wrote most of my book. Now, storytelling style. I mean, look, I think one of the things that's forgotten, which is why I think the most bizarre term I've heard is this crossover storytelling, right?
What is
Uh,
that? I mean, I've never heard
yeah.
that.
That I mean, you'll come up with a movie which will be from India and appeal to the US. You aim to be a crossover, right? Or something from India which is appealing to China, which is in my mind nonsense. Be true to who you are, because the key thing that has to be realized about a story, okay, um, it never is about us as individuals. It is about our inheritance. It is about what we have imbibed from our ancestors. There is a certain style of storytelling which will work only in India. And it's because of who we are, right?
The
Because
culture, the
yeah,
sensitivities, all of
and we
that.
are born with it, right?
Yeah.
And those who try and say, "Bhai, I'll do India also, I do US also," you're basically then you land up falling between two boats, right? Stories is about, a lot of it is about instinct. It's not about thought through stuff. Fortunately, we live in an age where people want to hear stories of other cultures, right? And they want authenticity, like Dark, which is a German series. It's a huge hit in India, Netflix series. The style is completely Germanic. The language is Germanic. It's with subtitles, right? Language is German, sorry, and the style is Germanic. Um, but those who want to get an authentic experience of what Germany will be like, enjoy that story, right? So
Right.
my main learning in stories is be true to who you are, right? Which means follow your instincts. You'll find that among the best communicators and ad filmmakers in India have been those who are rooted in India, not those who are westernized and trying to talk down to India that Indians, let us improve your culture to what is the common global culture. You see the
Right.
ad filmmakers who are really superstars, who know the pulse of of what kind of story will work. Those are the guys who are from the real India, who have roots,
Right.
because often best stories research will not find it for you, right?
Mm.
It is just instinctive. You just know this will work, right? And that instinct essentially comes from inheritance, from generations of memory, which is there in your bones, which is there in your genes, right?
Yes.
You just know instinctively this will work.
So one is definitely instinct, your culture, your inheritance, right? But the other is also the power of your idea. So how come, we all have ideas, but there are only few who are able to bring it to life?
A lot of people bring it to life. One shouldn't misread success for bringing to life, right? There are stories or books uh, which are uh, which are not big when they are released, but
Right.
become big 50 years later, 100 years later, right? One of my favorite movies of all time, Pyasa. It was a super flop when it was released, right?
Mm.
I don't know how many of you guys know that it was a massive flop when it was released. Today it's a cult classic, right? Um, I believe that, look, stories succeed when they are in tune with the zeitgeist, with the mood of the times, right?
Right.
Uh, uh, a movie or a story of an angry young man with no control over his temper would probably not have worked in the 50s when India was a hopeful nation. We just achieved
Yeah.
independence. Many of us actually believed wrongly, as it turns out, actually believed that socialism will cure all our ills. And socialism, as it always does, delivered nothing but economic disaster. And the economic disaster became real by 1970s, right? One of the few philosophies which has an unparalleled record of complete and utter economic failure is socialism. And by 1970s, it became clear. that things aren't working. There was massive unemployment, there was anger. And at that time, Salim Javed came out with Zanjeer. Right? Many actors didn't even want to, many actors didn't even want to take that up, right? Because they thought, yeah, this is too negative. There's a hero who's just losing his temper all the time, thrashing people. What the hell is this, right? The top actors didn't want to take it up. The actor who took it up was someone who thought, I have no future in any case. I've had so many flops. Amitabh Bachchan. And history was rewritten because of that movie. Why? Because it was a story which touched the mood of the times. There was anger at that time, right? It's hindsight vision. And my first book was rejected by every publisher it was sent to. I self-published Immortals of Melbourne.
Yeah.
And actually took off in the first week itself. Now, I'd love to say I'm this brilliant marketing genius and I planned it strategically that I know this is going to work. This is what the market needs. That's a lie, right? That if I said that, it would be a lie. I wrote a story which appealed to me, right? Which instinctively
it was ahead of your time?
Connected to me. Sorry?
Do you think it was ahead of your time? What about ideas?
No, it worked.
Stories which
it launched and it took off in the first week itself. But why did the publishers reject the book? They had very logical reasons, right? They said the only books that are succeeding right now are campus romance novels, right? Because the main market are the youth. And they said that my book is on a religious subject, which according to them, the youth aren't interested in, right? Secondly, they said, my books are too long, right? They assume that the audience is dumb. They cannot handle more than 100, 150 pages. My books are 400, 500 pages. They said even worse, you have these Gyan sessions every second chapter. Because for me, my stories are about, for me, the story is a wrapper for philosophies that I want to convey. They said the youth aren't interested in this. Okay. Philosophy is too long, religious subject, it's a guaranteed failure. The bizarre thing, these are the precise reasons why it's worked. And most of my readers are the youth, you'll notice at my book launch events, most of the people who come are the youth. And the youth are the ones who ask me philosophical questions. They don't get lost only on the story. They actually go into the philosophies that, I have a counterpoint to this philosophy. I think this is the way it should be. So we make certain assumptions as marketers, as storytellers. And perhaps the best thing to do is do something which feels instinctively right and try it. But most importantly, we must have a sense of the zeitgeist, of the mood of the times. One of the biggest problems with marketers I've seen, I worked for 14 years in banking. One of the departments I handled was marketing. I have to admit, I wasn't a marketer who moved into banking. I was a banker who also did marketing. Right? But one of the things I found, which was a problem with all marketers, they want to sit in their AC offices, look at PowerPoint presentations on the computer and think they will get India. It doesn't work that way. Okay, you have to travel, you have to go to the real India, you have to get an instinctive feel, right? You find who are the political leaders who work, who succeed? The ones who know the real India. Political leaders, who want to travel to Europe every second month for a holiday, or who want to have someone come and make presentations on India to them, they don't get it in India, right? You have to travel, you have to get an instinctive feel, and over time, you learn, you get a deeper feeling of what the mood of the times is, what the zeitgeist is. Like in my mind, I think one of the reasons my books have succeeded, it's in tune with the mood of the times, with what the youth want. After 1991, with economic reforms, as we have become richer, there is a new generation of youngsters who've come up who are far more self-confident than our generation was. And they're very proud of being Indian. But they want to hear modern messages. They don't want to hear Dakyanusi, regressive messages. But they want to hear those modern messages from our heroes, from our gods and goddesses. They don't want to hear those modern messages from a Western or a Westernized Indian talking down to them. That irritates them. That gets them back up. They rebel. Now, my books just happen to match the mood of the times. I think that's why it succeeded.
I wanted to just understand a little bit about how you bring stories to life, okay? And your pace, Amish, it's extraordinary. I mean, maybe it has something to do with the Writers Guild, the Writers Center, but that aside, what does it take to sort of, character traits, temperaments, skills to be able to be so plentiful, so authentic, and write stuff that is so relevant that people want to read it?
No, thank you. Firstly, thank you. Yeah, I've got some 8 books out in these last 10 years. And as I said earlier, my books on average are long, 400, 500 pages. There's a lot of research that goes into it. 7 of them are completely written by me. Suhail Dev, one book, is the first of my Writer Center. And the reason I have started the Writer Center is like one of my problems in life is I have too many story ideas for one lifetime. And my biggest fear, no, I mean it genuinely. My biggest fear is not that I will run out of story ideas. My biggest fear is I will die before I finish my story ideas, and that genuinely is my biggest fear. I cannot die before I finish all my stories. My soul will not get peace. I will go into my next life being completely unhappy and angry. So that's why I started the Writer Center, to increase my capacity, so that I can, some of my core stories I can tell them, they write the first draft, and then I work on it. While core stories I continue to write by myself. Now, how does one write so much, and which is where I come to when I was saying what the role of an author or activist is. What, or or someone who's in the social space, someone who's a spiritual thinker, whoever. The primary purpose, if you're in this kind of role, is never money, is never a career. If it is, you will never be productive. You're doing it because you don't know any other way, right? That if you don't do this, you'll be the unhappiest soul alive, right? That's the way it is for me. When I write, I'm happiest when I write. Right? It's almost a spiritual process for me. What irritates me often is the other things that I have to do. I have to do events to promote my books. I have to do interviews. I have to, and these are, I understand it's part of the job, right? But these aren't things which give me happiness and peace. And if you are in that space, no one needs to motivate you. Because you're not doing something for a career or anything. You're doing it because you just love it, right?
Yeah. So
It's
what's
a
your
bit like being in
process?
love, right?
So maybe, there is a lesson for us here in understanding your process of taking an idea to a tangible asset, which in your case is a book, which for everybody else on this session could be a campaign, or a story that they take to market for the brand that they're serving, right? So what's your process of making an idea and a story more tangible?
Look, I start thinking from a practical, pragmatic basis only when I'm in the marketing phase of the book. Right? When I'm in the creative phase, I don't think about you know who will read
Audience?
it,
Do you think
what
about
kind of story
audience?
will work. I don't think of the audience at all. I don't think of the publishers. I genuinely don't give a damn about anyone when I'm writing. Right? For
Love
me,
that.
it's the voice of my soul. I need to write. If I was thinking that, you tell me in 2010, would I have written a religious themed 500-page book with tons of philosophy in it? No, I would have written a campus romance novel because that's what was succeeded, right? Or I've
Yeah.
written, the Legend of Suhail Dev, my latest book. It is the story of a king set 1,000 years ago. Sadly, almost almost no one has heard of him. Sadly,
Yeah.
and even those who have are just very few people in North India. Uh, Rather, more specifically, just some parts of UP. Most people, excuse me, haven't even heard of him. Uh, from a marketing perspective, someone would tell me, "Yeah, pick a bigger character, no?"
Yeah, maybe
Uh,
it doesn't make sense
yeah,
from
yeah,
a marketing standpoint.
but I heard this story. I heard, and it's based on a true story. I heard it 6 years ago. It inspired me so much. I said, no, I have to write this. And I wasn't thinking, is there going to be a market? My job is to first write the story and then make the market for it. And why did the story inspire me? Because you think about it, it's King Suheldev was a subaltern caste Hindu, the king of a small principality in UP, right?
Yeah.
And the Turks were the military superpower of the day. The Turks are originally from Central Asia, not from Turkey. The Delhi, who we call the Delhi Sultans, Mughals, they were all Turks from Central Asia.
Okay.
They didn't just conquer and destroy much of India. They also conquered the Arab world, much of Europe, China. They were really they were among the most brutal invaders the world has ever seen. And they were the military superpower of the world from the 11th to the 16th century. They had conquered most of the world, right? And they were defeating big emperors everywhere, big kings everywhere. And this subaltern caste king of a small principality forges an army together of Hindus of all castes, of Indian Muslims, of Indian Buddhists, and defeats this all-conquering horde, and defeats them so comprehensively that no Turkic tribe comes back to India for 150 years. Because his attitude was not like some of the others who would defeat the enemy and say, "Ha, wapas jao." He killed every single man, didn't leave one person alive. Okay. So he was more the Lord Krishna type ruthless warriorship, rather than Lord Ram.
Yeah.
It's just such an inspiring story. And I was inspired and I wanted to say this story. That's how I thought about it.
Yeah.
Now, once you have made the story, then you have to figure out, okay, how do I market this now? Right?
Correct.
So what's the tentpole on which you market it? People may not have heard of King Suhaildin. They've heard of Mahmud Ghazni. So you market it based on that. And then you market the story of it. And the book's done well. It sold some 200,000 copies already in this time, in the last 3-4 months. So the way I see it, in communication or in product design, make something which is actually good. Like how Steve Jobs used to make products, right? He didn't do consumer research and make a product.
He's a master
He made a product which he felt was good. And in fact, he used to say that how will the consumer even know how to react? Because we are presenting a product to him that he has never seen.
Yeah.
So he has no idea. He or she has no idea. So you make a damn good product, then you figure out how to market it. That's the way to work.
So my takeaway from this, for everybody else on this call, is really that you work on something, you write something that inspires you, that motivates you, and then you create the market for it, right?
Yeah.
But here's the thing: you deal with so many different concepts, right? And dark and dense concepts as well. Truth versus reality, fiction versus mythology, good and evil. And evil is such a dense, such a heavily loaded word in India, right? The concept of karma, etc. And I've heard you say earlier that for you, your truth is your absolute truth. So you deal with different interpretations of truth. So I want to get a sense of, how is it that you deal with alternate realities and how you bring that into work? And if you have an advice for marketers and communicators for how they should be looking at dealing with different variations of truth that's out there when they're thinking of marketing a brand or a product.
In the deeper Indian sense, there is no translation for the English word evil, for example, in Vedic Sanskrit, the language of our ancestors. Because nothing was seen as evil. There is no adharma is not. There is no concept of a permanent heaven or a permanent hell, right?
Okay.
In the ancient Indian way, there was no concept of one truth, and that if you don't believe in this one truth, you will go to hell and burn for eternity. We had none of those concepts. Our ancestors were, in fact, they realized that actually the world is hugely complex. The world is nuanced. There are shades of gray. There are no simplistic black and white. And you'll realize throughout history, among the greatest criminals in human history have been those who believe in the simplistic concept of black and white, who are damn sure about my way is right and I have to convert or kill someone else if they disagree with me. Right? Indians never had this concept. We never sent armies abroad that you have to convert and become our way. We never had those concepts. Right?
It was the other way around. Yeah.
Sorry?
It was the other way around.
Yeah, it was the other way around. Right?
Yeah.
Now, my thing is that this is a hugely complex world. It is a globalized world. The intuitive Indian way is actually in tune with the mood of the times, with the zeitgeist of the world, where there are multiple truths, where you see the world in a nuanced way. The way we see Ravan in modern India is not the way Ravan is portrayed in Valmiki Ramayana, the original Ramayana. Right? Modern India, sadly, we've got affected by our invaders. So we see Ravan as pure evil. Right? Whereas in ancient India, things were seen in a far more nuanced way. There were good points to Ravan as well. Our ancestors saw that, right? So actually, if we imbibe the truly Indian way, we can work much better in a globalized world, because we don't feel the need then to enforce our truth on others. We are willing to engage with others and find some middle ground. Do you notice that corporates across the world, how many of them are headed by Indian CEOs? Have you noticed that? In tech and in a wide variety of areas.
Yeah.
How many? And the Chinese economy is much bigger than ours, and they have built great multinationals in their own company. But how many MNCs have got Chinese, CEOs as compared to Indians? Right?
Cultural context, right?
I think one of the things we Indians realize almost intuitively is there are multiple truths. The world is a nuanced place. Be a little, try and find the middle ground, right? And that works really better in a complex world, which is why Indians become good managers normally. Normally, we are used to chaos.
Well, but this whole concept of alternate reality and truth, that's perfectly valid, and I love the point you made. But I guess as a as a writer, as a creative professional who's thinking with their right brain, sometimes contradictions can be really attractive. But that same approach can also kind of bomb disastrously if you're in a marketing communications context. So, any suggestions there?
If someone can tell me a formula for guaranteed 100% success, I'd love to hear it. There is no formula for that, right? The entire point of not just business, of life, is that we try things. Sometimes they work, sometimes they don't. That's a reality of life. It's not just true of business. If you're young and you're trying to, man or a woman, and you're trying to build a relationship with someone of the opposite gender or even same gender, we're little people. You try. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. It's a reality of life. But there is one route which gives you 100% guarantee of failure, which is if you do nothing, right?
Love
So
that. Yeah.
the
True.
reality is that the only way to get 100% result is if you do nothing, and the 100% result you will get is failure, right? But 100% success doesn't work. And if your instinctive calls are wrong more than 3 times out of 10, then you're in the wrong industry. You don't understand the industry enough. Shift somewhere else. But if
Yeah.
it's within 3 out of 10, yeah, you're doing well. You're doing reasonably well.
Let me ask you this as an extension of this. I know, and you mentioned this a little while ago, right, that the Immortals of Meluha was probably rejected about 20 odd times before you decided to go ahead and publish this, right? So, and we know what happened afterwards. It's a runaway success. But there is a lesson, I think, in that for many of us, which is dealing with rejection, which is staying on purpose, which is just making sure that you stay motivated through failures, through rejections. Tell us a little bit about those initial years and how you dealt with that before you saw success.
Yeah, I won't lie and say that one didn't feel disappointment. Obviously, that every publisher rejected, and some of them rejected it so comprehensively. They gave logical reasons for why the book is a guaranteed failure. But the thing in life, what worked for me is a at an emotional or spiritual level. The book was so close to my heart that I genuinely didn't care whether it succeeded or not. Right? I was only writing for myself. I think perhaps without realizing it, I was living what Lord Krishna advises us in the Bhagavad Gita. Karmanya vadikaraste mafaleshu kadachana. That you have a right to your karma, but not to the fruits of your karma. Many modern Indians mistakenly interpret that as fatalism. That by success failure is not in your hands, so haath upar kar lo. No, that's not what Lord Krishna was telling us. What he was telling us is that if you're detached from failure or success, then you're unstoppable. See, because failure we all know is dangerous. It feels demotivation in your heart. What many of us don't realize, success is even more dangerous. It feels pride in your head. You see so many people, especially in the creative and sports world, who are one-hit wonders, right? Who are successful for a short time and they're not able to handle their success. And it doesn't just destroy their careers, it destroys their lives. Those who
Yeah.
are cricket aficionados, as I was, they will tell you Vinod Kambli was far more talented than Sachin Tendulkar. I mean, I know many of you may find it blasphemous, but at when they were young, Vinod Kambli had such raw talent, right? But he didn't have the discipline,
Yeah.
to take that talent forward. He couldn't handle the success. Sachin Tendulkar could, right? So sometimes success is as dangerous as failure. And that's what Lord Krishna is advising us, that if you're detached from it, uh, then you're just enjoying your karma. Then you're unstoppable. In fact, it is the most empowering line if you're detached from success or failure. But there is a practical thing as well. This is the emotional, spiritual thing. The practical thing, you need to pay the bills. I had a job. I wasn't
Yeah.
dependent on the book for money. And I resigned only after my second book when my royalty check became more than my salary. There is a
Correct.
practical matter of money. You have to take care of. It's not just about the right brain, it's the left brain as well.
Correct. Yeah, because at the end of the day, while you need to follow your heart and your truth, commercial success also matters, because at the end of the day, we all have
Of course,
bills to pay and
it's
families
like,
to run.
and someone else, and if you can find the money to pay the bills in some other job and something else, no dishonor in that. Okay? So I mean, yeah, the heart is important, but the stomach is below the heart. So in a way, the stomach is the foundation for the heart. So make sure the foundation is strong.
Yeah. So you jumped ship like many people on this session today. They would have jumped, like me, for example. I spent the first decade of my career as a journalist, and then I sold my soul and moved to marketing communications. But yours is slightly interesting. 14 years is not a mean time.
After 10 years, you move to the dark side.
Well, I did.
The empire got you.
But what convictions did you have beyond obviously commercial success, right? You needed some very strong conviction to say, okay, I've had one runaway success with a book, but this is what I want to do. And I want to dedicate my whole time, my entire mental bandwidth to this. So tell me a little bit about determination and doubt and how you dealt with that whole phase when you quit your successful banking career and moved to being a full-time author.
I would love it if I could give you a very, kind of inspiring, sexy answer, but sadly I can't. It was actually a very pragmatic, practical decision, because this was with my second book, okay, that I resigned when I realized, okay, this one is selling well as well, and I myself was actually very willing to carry on with my career and my books. Right, it was my family, so my elder brother and my ex-wife at that time, my wife, who convinced me that that look, you can't burn the candle at both ends, right?
Yes.
And you're doing well at your job, but the books are doing well as well, right? How many people get a chance like this? Give it a shot. If things don't work out, you can come back, right?
Yeah.
So in fact, they convinced me, and it was a very practical, pragmatic decision. So I should tell you, I resigned with the second book, and even when I resigned, I gave a long. I was an IDBI Federal Life Insurance in those days as a member of the SMC. So I gave a very long notice to the CEO, to my boss, many months, a good 4 or 5 months.
Wow, that's unheard of.
I identified my replacement. I trained him to the job. I completed all my projects. I left on very good terms with my boss. He threw a nice farewell party for me. Gave me a nice, lovely big murti of Shivji as a gift. And at that party, I told him also, Sarji, if things go bad, I will come back to this job. Right? So it was a very practical, pragmatic decision. And this is the thing I would like to suggest to all of you. Follow your heart. Let your heart decide the destination, but use your mind to plot the journey. Don't just jump without thinking. And most importantly, don't burn bridges unnecessarily. You never know when you need a bridge.
Correct.
Okay. So you don't have to kick your boss, bhar mein jao, sale, I'm going to follow my heart. Why do you need to do that? I mean, leave on good terms. You never know when you need the guy again, right?
Yeah. Yes.
So why burn bridges? Why create enemies? So I'm sorry, I know this sounds very boring, very practical, very pragmatic, but that's who I was.
Yeah. But it's also calculated risk taking, and
Yeah,
that's what you did. Yeah.
take a risk, but don't be stupid. Yeah,
Yeah.
plan it.
Right. I remember 2017, and I was doing really well at that time when, a CMO reached out to me and he said that, you know what, I would love for you to come and join me. And I'm going to create a new role for you, give you full creative freedom, chief storyteller. And I was like, that sounds ridiculously fun. But maybe this will be the best 2 years of my life or the worst 2, in which case it won't be 2 and I'll leave before that. But, maybe I need to take that risk. So I guess it really depends on how much risk you're willing to take in your own life, I guess. But
Yeah.
let me just shift track to something else you had said earlier that stuck to my mind, which was.
And sorry, if I may
numbers.
add, sometimes not taking any risk is perhaps the biggest risk of all, right? So
Correct.
be balanced, essentially. Again, I'm sorry to be quoting so much Sanskrit, but there's a lovely line that comes from our ancestors, Ati Sarvatra Varjayet, that extremism of any kind should be avoided, right? So excessive risk taking is not a good idea, but no risk taking is also not a good idea. Be
Correct.
balanced. Be
Yep.
balanced in everything that you do.
Yep. Absolutely. Great takeaway there. One thought which I was referring to earlier was you said that most of your audience is young, and you've sort of introduced mythology to a younger audience like never before. And was that sort of intentional? Because naturally, in the Indian formal education system, you never get a sense of our culture, our traditions, our history. And I'm not saying you need to be rooted in that, but you definitely need to have a grounding or at least an understanding of that, right? So was this kind of an intentional decision for you?
Look, I mean, an author tends to write stories in an area that he or she has knowledge in. I have knowledge of our traditions, of our scriptures, because of my family background. My grandfather
Yeah.
was a pandit in Kashi. My family is deeply religious, deeply into our scriptures, and because of that, in the ancient Indian way, the more traditional you are, the more liberal you'll be. We actually have to read our scriptures to realize how deeply liberal they are. So I had knowledge in that, and I had knowledge in structured financial products and life insurance, and I had a vague this thing that people aren't really interested in that, in stories on life insurance and and mortgage-backed securities. Would you buy a
That's an
book?
understatement.
Would you buy a book on credit default swaps, Bianca? I mean, if I wrote a book on credit default swaps, deeply, I find it interesting. I'm sure you would. So you write books on on areas that you have knowledge in, but on your education system point, this is an area of passion for me. I've written on it a lot, and this I think is one of the biggest weaknesses in our country. Our education system, we are still largely stuck with the nonsensical system that the British left, a colonial system, and our system is designed in a way कि किसी भी तरह बच्चे को अंग्रेज बना दो. Okay, that's how the entire system is designed. We teach absolutely nothing about our culture, about our traditions. Our literature, will have Shakespeare or Tennyson. It will not have Kalidasa. It will not have Bhasa. It will not have Tiruvalluvar. It will not have Mirza Ghalib.
You're talking to an English honors graduate who's read enough of Milton and Chaucer, but
I'm not against that. Read, but first learn our own mathematics.
Yeah,
I'm a maths graduate,
I'm with
right?
you.
I've done a BSc in maths. We are taught of Pythagoras, we are taught Euclid, we are taught nothing of Bhaskaracharya, we are taught nothing of Bodhayana. Bodhayana discovered Pythagoras theorem before Pythagoras did. These Europeans accept it, but Indians don't know it. Right?
Yeah.
In medicine, we'll teach Hippocrates, we'll not teach Shushruta, we'll not teach Charak. The number of seasons that's taught in our school. What were you taught about seasons in school? How many seasons are there?
Well, autumn, spring, which we never experienced, to be honest, in India. But hey,
autumn, spring, and summer and winter, right?
Yeah, but there's no monsoon. But that's such a big.
And I was in the second standard, and I asked my teacher, "This ma'am, monsoon kahan gaya? Why are there 4 seasons now?" Europe has 4 seasons. India actually has 6 seasons, right? Even the seasons that are taught to us is freaking European.
Yeah.
We are that ridiculous, our education system. We are completely disconnected from India, and there's a real life impact of this. You see architecture, the nonsense they teach in our architecture schools, which is why we have glass wall buildings in India. Glass wall
Yeah.
buildings make sense in Western Europe, where there's a shortage of sun, so there's high
And you need
heating
to
bills.
preserve
You
heat.
want a glass wall building so the sun comes in and heats. This is India, there's sun all the freaking time. If we are building a glass wall building, we are essentially building a giant microwave oven, right? And then we have to blast the AC from the inside. But यार architecture students उनको तो European बनना है, Indian तो बनना है नहीं. But they're not taught Indian techniques, right?
Right.
Uh, this is, I mean, we have to put pressure on our politicians, Indianize our education system. And trust me, I'm living in the UK. I can tell you, most modern British will not care two hoots if we abandon their colonial education system. I assure you, Queen Elizabeth is not going to come to Pragati Maidan and start protesting that we have destroyed the education system or we have changed the education system that the British colonial Raj built and we've Indianized it. People
It's
in
our
UK
own
don't care.
hesitation.
It is
It's
our
our
fault.
own
For 70 years, we've not Indianized it. It's our fault. Sorry, it's
Yeah.
an area of passion of mine, so I speak a
Of
little.
course. And it's so much fun chatting with you, but I know we're sort of up on time and I have so many questions that have come through. But let me take one final question from you.
Okay.
Words of advice to communicators and marketers who are listening in today, to PR professionals, who are storytellers in their own right. And just some final thoughts in terms of how you would suggest that they approach their craft, because to me this is a merging of the art and science of storytelling, right? Your final words and advice to them.
I would suggest three things. One, do not sit in your air-conditioned office. Right? PowerPoint presentations give you no idea of the truth. Travel across India, travel in your market. Don't stay in your upmarket areas in your city. Go to where your customers actually are. Engage with them. Eat their food. Talk to them. You'll get a deep insight which research reports can never give you. Travel across the country. Travel. Not only will you learn, it's tons of fun. India is a lovely country. Travel around, right? That's the first thing. So that you develop a deep insight and force your team to do it, right? It's a part of the job to travel and learn. Then you get a sense of the zeitgeist of the country. You get a sense of just, how much passion and drive there is in small town and rural India. I travel around, I find the ambition, the drive that they have to succeed. It is such a beautiful sight, right? And there are upsides and downsides of this, because part of that passion to succeed, at times you hear of stories of crime, stories of excesses, right? But a lot of it comes from this immense passion to succeed. So that's the first thing. Understand the zeitgeist. For that, travel. Understand your country. Okay. Understand your market. The second thing, realize that whatever the product features are, it has to be communicated through a good story. So make sure it's a good story first of all. What you're essentially creating through, if it's an online film, you have more time. You can have 4 or 5 minutes. If it's a TV ad film, it's a 45 second or 60 second or 30 second, whatever. If it's a newspaper ad, it's copy. But what you're essentially communicating is a story first. You want to draw people in, learn from Vedvyas, right? Draw people in, and then your key selling point should come as a part of the story, right? Make people want to listen to you rather than just talking. That's the second point. Third point, have role clarity. Do not try and become an activist or a storyteller. Leave that job to storytellers, right? Do not try and become a politician. Leave that job to politicians. Do not try and become a judge. Leave that job to judges. Your job is a brand manager. Do what is good for your company. If you have, like I was a brand manager too, but I won't bring in my storytelling, my personal philosophical passions onto that. That's not my role. My role was to sell life insurance products. In my books, I can bring that in. So I have role clarity, right? That is a very critical part. And this is not just true of brand managers. I see this across the entire world. So many professions, there is absolute lack of role clarity. Like I find leaders commenting on internal politics of another country. That's not your job, man. Your job is whoever gets elected, you have to work with them, because your job is to look after your own country, right? So have role clarity. Whatever personal opinion you may have is your personal opinion. You're not supposed to speak of it publicly, right? Have role clarity. That's a third thing. Again, sorry, but I will add a caveat to that. That doesn't mean you do things that are clearly immoral. You will not be racist. You will not be casteist. Don't do that. I mean, those kind of things, or sexist. No, those things are not okay. You'll not say I have to sell my product, so I don't give a damn. I'll do anything. No, there are lines you don't cross. But have role clarity.
Well, those are lovely takeaways. And Amish, thank you so much for your time. It was so energizing talking to you. And I really enjoyed the conversation, and I hope everybody else did. Master storyteller, author extraordinaire, and a great social commentator. Thank you, Amish. And we'll be back to you now.
Thank you, Bianca. Absolute pleasure.